My name is Chloe, I'm 27, and I never imagined I'd find myself waking up in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, only to hear that my parents had told the doctors they couldn't come because my sister, Olivia, was taking her dog for a walk. Even when the doctor explicitly warned them that it might be my last night on Earth, they didn't show. This wasn't the first time they had put Olivia's needs before mine, but I was determined it would be the absolute last. Let me share the story of the letter I left behind, the one that blew our family apart and ultimately put it back together in a way I never thought possible. But before I dive in, take a moment to drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own family, please hit that like and subscribe button. I grew up in a leafy, quiet suburb in Ohio, in a picture-perfect house with a manicured lawn that hid the cracks in its foundation. My parents, Robert and Susan Pierce, had 2 daughters. I was the older one, and Olivia arrived 3 years after me. From the very second she was born, it was clear that the rules for how we were treated were fundamentally different. I have this vivid memory from when I was 8 years old. I'd won first place in the district spelling bee, a huge deal for a 3rd grader. I remember running all the way home, clutching the blue ribbon so tightly my knuckles were white, my chest swelling with a pride I couldn't wait to share. When I burst through the door, my parents gave me a quick, distracted pat on the head before their attention immediately snapped back to the backyard, where Olivia was having a monumental breakthrough. She was learning to tie her own shoelaces. I stood there, ribbon in hand, and told myself it was logical. Tying shoes was a big life skill. A spelling bee was just a school thing. By the time I hit 12, I was a master of this kind of justification. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my mother would offer a non-committal nod of approval, but she'd save her real, unbridled enthusiasm for Olivia, who would scrape by with a B- in her art class. When I made it to the state swimming finals, my father told me he was proud, but he couldn't possibly come to the meet because Olivia had a slight headache and needed him to stay home with her. I became an expert at spinning their excuses into something reasonable. They were just busy. Olivia was the baby of the family. She naturally required more attention. I was the independent one. I could manage on my own. I repeated these lines to myself so often that I almost believed them. They were my shield against the painful truth that my accomplishments seemed to evaporate on contact, while Olivia was celebrated for simply existing. My health made everything infinitely more complicated. At 16, I was diagnosed with a severe autoimmune disorder, a condition that demanded daily medication and constant monitoring. My system was a delicate balance, easily thrown into chaos by stress, certain foods, and especially animal dander. But even with a diagnosis that serious, my parents treated my health issues like a personal inconvenience to them. If I had to miss a day of school for a doctor's appointment, my mother would let out a heavy, theatrical sigh about how she had to shuffle her entire schedule around. If I had a bad reaction and needed to be rushed to the emergency room, my father would spend the entire drive complaining about the future medical bills. Olivia, on the other hand, was the very picture of perfect health. She was vibrant, energetic, and the star of her high school soccer team. My parents never missed a single one of her games. They would be there in the stands, holding up giant hand-painted signs with her name on them, cheering until they were hoarse. I'd be sitting right next to them, often feeling dizzy and nauseous from a flare-up, but I was determined to be a supportive sister, even if my own parents couldn't offer me the same courtesy. As we got older, the gap in their treatment of us widened into a chasm. When it was time to think about college, my parents sat me down and explained that they could only afford to help one of us with tuition. And since Olivia wasn't as academically gifted, they reasoned, she was the one who would need the financial support more. So, I worked. I juggled 2 part-time jobs while going to school full-time, putting myself through college and somehow managing to maintain a 3.9 GPA. Meanwhile, Olivia dropped out after a single semester, claiming it was too stressful. To comfort her, my parents bought her a brand new convertible. Despite all of this, I clung to a sliver of hope that one day, My parents would finally see me, really see me. I kept trying to earn their approval, their attention, their love. I graduated with honors, landed a great job as a graphic designer, and made a point to visit home regularly, always arriving with thoughtful gifts for everyone, remembering their favorite things and bending over backward to be the perfect, dutiful daughter. But it didn't matter what I did. Olivia was, and always would be, the sun, and the rest of us were just planets caught in her orbit. Last year, after another holiday season where I felt more like a stranger than a family member, I decided I needed to create some distance. I moved to a city about 40 miles away, close enough that I could visit, but far enough that I could finally breathe and build a life that wasn't centered on a desperate, futile quest for their validation. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment. I was excelling at my job, and for the first time, I felt like I was living for myself. Olivia, now 24, was still living at home. She drifted through a series of dead-end jobs that never lasted more than a few months, spending most of her time shopping with our mom's credit card, partying with friends, and curating her life on social media. My parents continued to bankroll her lifestyle, acting as if it was completely normal for a woman her age to have no responsibilities. The family dynamic reached a whole new level of absurd when Olivia announced she wanted a dog, and not just any dog, but a purebred Siberian husky that cost over $4,000. Despite knowing full well about my severe, medically documented allergy to animal dander, my parents not only agreed, but paid for the dog, which she named Casper, and all of its expensive accessories. They even converted their home office into a special room just for the dog, complete with custom-built furniture and its own climate control system. When I raised concerns, pointing out that this meant I could no longer safely visit my own childhood home, my mother's response was simple and dismissive. "Oh, you can just take your allergy pills, sweetie. Olivia really needs this dog for her emotional well-being." That was my family in a nutshell. Olivia's emotional whims always trumped my physical health. Her wants always outweighed my needs. And yet, they were still my family, and some broken, desperate part of me kept holding on, praying that one day things would change. I tried to maintain a decent relationship with Olivia through it all. She was spoiled and incredibly self-centered, but I didn't think she was malicious. She had just been raised in a bubble where she was the center of the universe. She didn't know any other way to be. Occasionally, when it was just the two of us, I'd see a flicker of the sweet little sister I used to build sandcastles with. Those brief moments were just enough to keep me from giving up entirely, to make me hope that somewhere beneath all the layers of favoritism and dysfunction, there was a real family connection worth saving. Looking back, I can see how I was just setting myself up for the ultimate heartbreak. I was clinging to a fantasy, a version of my family that existed only in my head, because accepting the reality of who they were and how little they valued me was just too painful. But sometimes, fantasies feel safer than the truth, especially when that truth feels like a knife to the heart. I had spent 27 years trying to earn a love that should have been a given. It would take nearly dying for me to finally accept that no amount of trying was ever going to be enough. 3 months ago, after a few weeks of keeping my distance, I decided I should make an effort to reconnect. I called my mother and suggested I come over for dinner that weekend. To my genuine surprise, she sounded thrilled by the idea. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, Chloe. We haven't seen you in ages. I'll make your favorite roast chicken, and your father can pick up that pecan pie you love from the downtown bakery." Her warmth ignited that old, familiar spark of hope inside me. Maybe my absence had made them miss me. Maybe they really did care. I spent the rest of the week actually looking forward to Saturday. I even splurged on a nice bottle of wine to bring and a new dress I thought my mother would like. As Saturday drew closer, I was meticulous about my health. My condition had been stable, and I wanted to keep it that way. I took extra doses of my medication and mentally prepared myself, reminding myself to keep my expectations low, to focus on the positives, and to not let any small disappointments ruin the evening. When I pulled into their driveway that evening, my mother greeted me with a warm hug, and the house smelled of roasting chicken and herbs. For one fleeting moment, everything felt right. And then I heard it, a sharp bark from inside the house. My heart sank. Is Casper here? I asked, already feeling that telltale tightness spreading across my chest, the precursor to a serious allergic reaction. Well, of course Casper is here. This is his home, my mother replied, looking at me as if I'd asked the most ridiculous question in the world. Olivia brought him back from her apartment this morning. She's staying for the weekend. I hadn't even known Olivia had finally moved out. That was a whole other can of worms. Right now, a much more pressing issue was taking hold. Mom, you know I'm severely allergic. I can't be in a closed space with a dog, even with my medication. We've been over this. My mother's expression immediately soured. Well, we can't just kick him outside, Chloe. It's chilly out, and Olivia would be devastated. You'll be fine for one dinner. Just pop another pill if you feel you need to. Before I could argue, my father appeared in the doorway beaming. There's my girl. Come on in. Dinner's almost on the table. I hesitated, my body screaming at me to turn around, but I stepped inside. What else could I do? I'd driven 40 miles. I'd brought wine. I'd built this evening up in my head. Walking out now would just reinforce their narrative of me being the difficult one, the one who couldn't even get through a single family meal without making a scene. Inside, Olivia was curled up on the sofa with Casper, a massive, fluffy husky who started barking excitedly the moment he saw me. Olivia glanced up from her phone just long enough to give me a lazy wave. Hey, Chloe, look how big Casper's gotten. Isn't he the cutest? She buried her face in the dog's thick fur, completely oblivious to my growing distress. I kept my distance, trying to take shallow breaths. He's certainly big. I didn't realize he'd be here tonight. Where else would he be? Olivia laughed as if it were obvious. He's family. Those two words hit me harder than she could ever imagine. A dog she'd owned for less than a year was family, while I, her sister of 27 years, was expected to poison myself just to be in the same room. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I took another dose of my allergy medication and used my emergency inhaler. I stared at my reflection, noticing the red hives already starting to bloom on my neck. I gave myself a silent pep talk. Just get through dinner. Keep the peace. It's only a few hours. When I came back, we all sat down to eat. The roast chicken was perfectly cooked, but I could barely taste it. My sinuses were so congested, it felt like my head was packed with cotton. The conversation, predictably, revolved entirely around Olivia and Casper. His potty training progress, the adorable way he tilted his head, the expensive new organic food they were having, special ordered for him, the dog-friendly social events Olivia was planning to attend. I tried to join in, but every time I opened my mouth, a wheezing cough escaped. "Are you all right, Chloe?" my father finally asked, not with concern, but with a hint of annoyance. "You've been coughing all night." "It's Casper," I wheezed, my throat feeling scratchy. "I told Mom I was allergic when I got here." My mother frowned. "I thought you were just being dramatic. You always had a flair for the dramatic when it came to your health." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and physical discomfort. "I have a documented medical condition. My doctor has specifically warned me about being around animal dander for prolonged periods." "Well, you seem fine enough to have eaten a full plate and dessert," my father observed, as if my ability to swallow food somehow negated my body's full-blown rebellion. "I think I should go," I said, pushing my chair back from the table. "Thank you for dinner, but I really don't feel well." "Already?" "But we haven't even had coffee," my mother protested, "and I wanted to show you the new curtains I put up in the living room." "Another time," I said, grabbing my purse. "I need to get home and use my nebulizer." Olivia just rolled her eyes. "You're so serious about everything, Chloe. It's just a few sniffles. Pop a Benadryl and chill out." I didn't even have the energy to respond to that. I thanked them again, politely declined their half-hearted attempts to make me stay, and walked out to my car. As I drove away, I could feel my chest constricting, each breath becoming a conscious, labored effort. I pulled over at the first 24-hour pharmacy I saw and bought the strongest antihistamines they had, downing them in the parking lot. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. I immediately used my nebulizer, took a cool shower to try and calm the burning hives, and collapsed into bed. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I told myself the same old story I always did. They don't mean to hurt me. They just don't get it. Olivia's their baby. I'm stronger. I'm independent. I don't need their coddling. But a small, quiet voice deep inside me whispered a different, terrifying truth. They understand perfectly. They just don't care. And no amount of strength or independence could ever fill the gaping hole left by parents who consistently and deliberately chose someone else over you. I pushed that voice away and fell into a troubled sleep, completely unaware that this night was just the prelude to a medical crisis that would force me to confront the reality of my family once and for all. 3 days after that disastrous family dinner, I woke up feeling like an elephant was sitting on my chest. My skin was on fire with hives, and when I tried to swing my legs out of bed, the entire room tilted violently. I fumbled for my phone and called my doctor's office, leaving a frantic message for the nurse, explaining my symptoms and the prolonged dog exposure. This wasn't my first severe reaction, but it was by far the worst. Normally, the effects would peak within 48 hours and then start to fade. The fact that I was getting progressively worse 3 days later was deeply alarming. I somehow managed to shower and get dressed for work, though every movement sent waves of pain through my body. I had a major presentation that day, one I'd spent weeks preparing. In my mind, missing it wasn't an option. I had built my entire identity around my ability to push through illness and exceed expectations, and today would be no different. As I drove to my office, memories of past medical emergencies flooded my mind. When I was 17, during my first major autoimmune flare, I was hospitalized for 3 days. My mother visited once, for less than an hour, explaining that Olivia had a dance recital she absolutely could not miss. My father called on the phone but never came in person, saying hospitals gave him the creeps. During my sophomore year of college, I got pneumonia so badly I could barely make it to the bathroom. My roommate, terrified, called my parents. They wired me money for medicine but said they couldn't come visit because Olivia was going through a tough breakup and needed their emotional support. Every single time I told myself it was fine. I was an adult. I could handle it. I didn't need my parents to hold my hand. But the truth was, being chronically ill without a family support system was profoundly lonely. By the time I stumbled into my office, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. My breathing was shallow and ragged, and black spots were dancing at the edges of my vision. My colleague, Sarah, took one look at me as I collapsed at my desk and rushed over. "Chloe, my God, you look awful. What's wrong?" Her face was etched with genuine concern. Allergic reaction I managed to get out between ragged breaths. Was at my parents' house. Thought I could push through. Sarah's brow furrowed. "You need to go to a doctor. Now. This looks really serious." "The presentation," I protested weakly. "I'll handle the presentation," she insisted, her voice firm. "Your health is more important than any client meeting. Do you need me to drive you to urgent care?" I shook my head, touched by her kindness, but still stubbornly reluctant to admit how bad I was feeling. "I'll call my doctor again. If they say I need to come in, I'll get a ride." Sarah looked unconvinced, but went back to her desk after making me promise to keep her updated. I called my doctor's office again, and this time they put me straight through to the on-call nurse. After I described my worsening symptoms, her tone became urgent. "You need to go to the emergency room immediately," she said, no room for argument in her voice. "This sounds like it's progressing to anaphylaxis. With your medical history, we can't take any chances. You need to be seen right now." I hung up the phone and just sat there for a moment, the world seeming to buzz around me. A part of me, the part conditioned by a lifetime of self-neglect, still wanted to stay and do the presentation. But another part, the rational part that I had silenced so many times, knew this was a life-or-death situation. I gathered my things and walked shakily over to Sarah's desk. The nurse said to go to the ER. "Of course," she said, already grabbing her purse. "I'm driving you. You are not going alone." I tried to argue, but she wouldn't hear it, and to be honest, I was immensely relieved. A deep primal fear was beginning to set in. Something was very, very wrong with my body, and the thought of facing it by myself was terrifying. In the car on the way to the hospital, I decided to call my parents. Despite everything, a small, foolish part of me still held out hope that in a true emergency, they would finally step up. The call went to voicemail. I left a brief message trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, it's me. I'm having a really severe reaction and I'm on my way to the hospital." I didn't want to sound overly dramatic, but I hoped the gravity of the situation would come through. Next, I tried Olivia, thinking she could get a hold of them. "Hey, what's up?" she answered cheerfully, the sound of Casper barking loudly in the background. "Liv," I rasped, my voice getting weaker by the second. "I'm having a really bad reaction. I'm on my way to the ER. I can't reach Mom and Dad. Can you please let them know?" "Oh, that sucks," she said, her tone completely distracted. "Casper, stop that. Sorry, he's trying to chew my new boots. Yeah, I'll tell them when I talk to them. They're taking us to that new dog park across town later." "Olivia, this is serious," I stressed, forcing the words out. "I need them to know I'm going to the hospital. Now." Okay, geez. I'll text them. Gotta go. Casper's literally destroying my favorite pair of sneakers. Feel better. And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone, a wave of cold disbelief washing over me. Even now, with me on my way to the emergency room, she and her dog were the priority. I slumped back in the passenger seat, fighting back tears of pure frustration and hurt. "Family?" Sarah asked gently. "Something like that," I muttered. By the time we screeched to a halt at the emergency room entrance, I was struggling to stay conscious. My throat felt like it was closing up, and the hives had merged into a single burning sheet across my skin. Sarah helped me inside, where the triage nurse took one look at me and yelled for a gurney. The next few minutes were a chaotic blur. I was rushed into a trauma room. My clothes were cut away, and I felt the sharp pricks of needles as they pumped me full of epinephrine and steroids. Monitors were being attached to my chest, and doctors were shouting questions at me about my medical history, my allergies, my medications. I tried to answer, but my consciousness was flickering like a dying candle. The last thing I clearly remember is calling out for my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, begging someone to make sure she could feed my cat. Mrs. Peterson was the sweet elderly woman who lived across the hall from me. She had no idea where I was, but in my delirious state, all I could think about was my cat being left alone. Then everything went black. I found out later that as my condition spiraled, the hospital staff had tried repeatedly to contact my parents. They finally got a hold of them around 6 p.m., a full 4 hours after I'd been admitted. A kind nurse named Mary, who had stayed by my side, later told me what was said. "Mr. and Mrs. Pierce? This is Mercy General Hospital. Your daughter, Chloe, has been admitted with a severe anaphylactic reaction. Her condition is critical, and we strongly advise you to come immediately." "Tonight?" my father had apparently responded. "We can't possibly come tonight. Our other daughter is at a new dog park across town, and we need to pick her up." "Sir," the doctor had interjected, taking the phone, "I don't think you understand. Your daughter is in critical condition. Her organs are beginning to fail. Tonight might be her last night. You need to be here." There was a pause. Then my mother's voice came on the line. "Well, we can't just leave Olivia stranded with her dog. Surely Chloe will stabilize. We can probably stop by tomorrow if she's still there." Mary told me the doctor was so stunned he was speechless for a moment. Finally, he just said, "I will note in her chart that you have been informed of her condition," and hung up. As I drifted in and out of consciousness that night, I was vaguely aware of beeping machines and gentle hands tending to me. At one point, I felt a hand holding mine and managed to open my eyes. It was Mary, the older nurse with kind eyes. "You just hang in there, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." I squeezed her hand, a weak flicker of gratitude in the darkness. This stranger was showing me more compassion than my own family ever had. All through that long night, my body waged a war against itself. By morning, the immediate crisis had passed, but the damage was done. The doctors had saved my life, but my heart had been irrevocably broken. Friends and colleagues, contacted by Sarah, started to arrive. They brought flowers, magazines, and most importantly, their presents. But not once did my parents call. Not once did Olivia text to see if I was still alive. As the stark reality of their abandonment settled in, something inside me finally snapped. The fantasy I had clung to for 27 years shattered into a million pieces. And in the silence of that hospital room, with the truth laid bare, a plan began to form. It started with a single thought. It was time to write a letter. The first 72 hours in the ICU are a hazy memory, a collage of disorienting flashes, the cold rush of an IV drip, the relentless rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor, and the persistent sensation of drowning even with an oxygen mask strapped to my face. What I remember with piercing, painful clarity, however, is the moment I fully woke up and realized I was completely alone. I opened my eyes to the sterile white tiles of the ceiling and turned my head, half expecting, against all logic, to see my mother sitting in the visitor's chair. Instead, a young nurse was quietly checking my vitals. "Welcome back," she said with a gentle smile when she saw my eyes were open. "You gave us all quite a scare." "My parents?" I asked, my voice a dry, painful rasp. Her professional smile faltered for just a second. I don't believe they've been in yet. Would you like me to try calling them for you?" And that's when the full weight of it hit me. I had almost died, and my parents had consciously chosen not to be there because my sister needed a ride from a dog park. I had always known they favored her, but I'd held on to a secret, desperate belief that if it ever came down to a true life or death situation, they would show up for me. That belief was the last thread holding my fantasy of our family together, and now it had snapped. "No," I said after a long, heavy silence. "Don't call them." The nurse, whose name badge read Ellie, seemed to grasp the unspoken tragedy in that moment. She gently patted my hand. "Yeah, you've had other visitors, though. A woman named Sarah has been here every single day, and a few other friends have stopped by. They were very worried about you." Tears I didn't have the strength to hold back began to slide down my temples and into my hair. My colleagues, people I made small talk with over coffee, had shown more love for me than my own mother and father. The contrast was a fresh wound on top of all the old ones. Later that day, Dr. Evans, the immunology specialist, came to explain just how close I had come. "You experienced what's called a biphasic anaphylactic reaction, and a particularly severe one," she explained, her tone kind but direct. "The initial exposure to the allergen triggered the first phase, but then your body had a delayed and much more aggressive second phase reaction. This is why you got so much worse days after the exposure. Your underlying autoimmune condition created a perfect storm inside your system." "Could I have died?" I asked, needing to hear the unvarnished truth. Dr. Evans met my gaze directly. "Yes, Chloe. Without immediate and aggressive medical intervention, this type of reaction is often fatal. The fact that your symptoms progressed slowly was a double-edged sword. It made the situation more dangerous because many people might delay seeking help, just as you did." She went on to explain that I'd need to remain in the hospital for at least another week for observation. The prolonged exposure had sent my immune system into such a tailspin that my entire long-term treatment plan would need to be reevaluated. As the hours passed, More pieces of that horrible night fell into place. Sarah visited during her lunch break, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "The ER staff called your parents multiple times, Chloe," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I was there for the first call back from the doctor. They literally told your parents you might not make it through the night, and your father said they were busy with Olivia and her dog. I nearly snatched the phone to scream at them myself. She told me she had stayed at the hospital until the early hours of the morning, only leaving when the nurses assured her I was stabilizing." I was silent for a long time, letting the ugly truth sink in. Anger, hurt, disappointment. But underneath it all, a strange and unfamiliar feeling was taking root: resolve. For the first time, I was seeing my family with absolute clarity, free from the fog of hope and the endless excuses I had always made for them. "If they show up," I finally said, my voice quiet but firm, "I don't want to see them. Please just tell the nurses I'm resting and can't have visitors." Ellie, the young nurse, heard me and nodded, her eyes full of an understanding that went beyond her years. Of course. That night, lying awake in the dark, listening to the symphony of hospital sounds, I made a decision. I would use this time, this forced, painful pause in my life, to finally confront the toxic dynamic that had nearly killed me. I was going to write a letter, a final, definitive statement that would lay bare the truth and establish the boundaries I should have set years ago. The next morning, I asked Ellie for a pen and some paper. She brought them to me without a single question, along with a small lap desk. As my physical strength slowly returned over the next few days, I wrote. I poured 27 years of suppressed pain, disappointment, and overlooked achievements onto those pages. During this time, the contrast between my biological family and my chosen one grew even sharper. Sarah visited every day, bringing me clean clothes from my apartment and updates from work. Other friends came with books and magazines, their simple presence a balm to my raw nerves. Mrs. Peterson, my elderly neighbor I had cried out for in my delirium, actually came to visit. Sarah had tracked her down to ask about my cat, and the dear woman had not only been feeding him, but decided to come see me herself. She arrived with a thermos of homemade chicken noodle soup. "I have 5 of my own children and 12 grandchildren," she told me as she sat by my bed, "but none of them live in this state. We have to look out for each other, you and I. That's what good neighbors do." Even Dr. Evans went above and beyond. She took extra time to explain my condition, drawing diagrams and patiently answering every question. When I mentioned my parents' refusal to visit, she didn't offer empty platitudes. "That must be incredibly painful," she said, simply validating my hurt. "Sometimes, Chloe, the families we build are more important than the ones we're born into." Her words resonated deep within me as I put the finishing touches on my letter. By the 6th day, it was complete. A 4-page, handwritten Declaration of Independence. I sealed it in an envelope and waited. On the 7th day, just as I was preparing for my discharge, Ellie came into my room. "Your parents just called the nurses' station," she said. "They said they're coming to visit this afternoon, around 3. She paused. "Do you want me to tell them you're not up for visitors?" I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Number, let them come. But I won't be here." She looked confused. "You're being discharged?" "Yes," I said, having already finalized the plan with Dr. Evans. "But I have a favor to ask. When they arrive, can you give them this?" I handed her the sealed envelope. "And can you place it on the pillow so it looks like I left it for them?" A look of profound understanding dawned on Ellie's face. "Of course," she said softly. "I can do that." By 2:30 that afternoon, I was officially discharged. Sarah picked me up and we sat in a small coffee shop across the street from the hospital, a place with a clear view of the main entrance. At precisely 3:15 p.m., I watched as my parents, Robert and Susan Pierce, finally walked through those glass doors, a full week after their daughter had almost died. I had no idea what would happen when they read my words, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that our lives would never be the same. and for the first time, that thought didn't fill me with terror. It filled me with hope. Sarah's spare bedroom, with its large, sunny windows and strict no pets policy, became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. It was the perfect allergen-free environment for my body to begin its slow, painstaking recovery. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted, waving off my concerns about being an imposition. "Honestly, it's nice having someone else around." The first few days were a blur of sleep. My body, pushed to its absolute limit, demanded 12 to 14 hours of rest a day. Dr. Evans had put me on a new aggressive medication regimen, and Sarah, my unexpected guardian angel, helped me keep track of all the pills and injections. As my body healed, my mind began the even harder work of processing decades of emotional neglect. The letter I had left on that empty hospital bed was my line in the sand. It was the moment I stopped being the girl desperate for their approval and started becoming a woman determined to value herself. The words had poured out of me in that sterile room, each sentence a release of pressure that had been building my entire life. Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I have spent the last week in this hospital, fighting for my life after doctors told you I might not survive the night. You chose not to come. You chose to help Olivia with her dog instead. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern that has defined my entire life. For 27 years, I have made excuses for you. I told myself Olivia needed you more, that I was the strong one, that one day you would finally see my worth. I nearly died waiting for that day. I'm not writing this to make you angry, though I have every right to be. I'm writing this from a place of brutal, painful clarity. I can no longer be a part of a family dynamic that consistently ranks my health, my achievements, and my very life as less important than my sister's fleeting desires. Effective immediately, I am stepping away from our relationship. I need space to heal, not just from this medical crisis, but from a lifetime of being made to feel invisible. I will not be contacting you, and I ask you to respect this decision by not contacting me. If at some point in the future you are genuinely willing to build a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect and equal consideration for both your daughters, then we can talk. But that would require you to acknowledge the profound harm you have caused and commit to real change. I won't hold my breath. Letting go of the dream of having parents who love and value me for who I am is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to save myself. Chloe. I had no idea how they'd react. I half expected frantic calls, angry texts, maybe even them showing up at Sarah's apartment. Instead, there was nothing, just a deep, profound silence. That silence was more telling than any angry outburst could have been. A week after my discharge, I had my first session with a therapist named Dr. Miller, whom Dr. Evans had recommended. We started by unpacking the trauma of the hospital, but it didn't take long to dig into the lifelong patterns that led me there. What you're describing, Chloe, is a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic, Doctor, Miller explained in our third session. In some families, parents unconsciously project all their hopes and positive feelings onto one child, the golden child, while using the other child, the scapegoat, as a vessel for all their negative feelings and frustrations. But why, I asked, the question I'd been asking myself my whole life. What did I do to deserve it? Nothing, she said, her voice firm and reassuring. It has nothing to do with you. This dynamic is born from the parent's own unresolved issues. The golden child's dependence validates them, while the scapegoat's independence is often perceived as a rejection or a threat. Her words were a revelation. All my life, I thought if I could just be more perfect, more successful, more accommodating, I could finally earn their love. The truth was, my very strengths, my independence and resilience, were what made me their target. The most damaging part of this, Doctor. Miller continued, is that it trains the scapegoat to run on a hamster wheel, constantly chasing an approval that will never come. You've been sacrificing yourself, hoping to finally win a prize that was never really on offer. So what do I do now? I asked, feeling a strange mix of liberated and utterly lost. Now you grieve, she said gently. You grieve the parents you deserved but never had. You feel the anger and the sadness. And then you slowly, carefully begin to build a life based on your own values, not on the hope of finally being seen by people who are incapable of seeing you. Those therapy sessions became my lifeline. I finally gave myself permission to feel the rage, the sorrow, and the profound sense of loss without immediately making excuses for my parents. I wept for the little girl with the spelling bee ribbon. I raged at the parents who chose a dog over their dying daughter. I mourned the family I always wanted but never truly had. In parallel, I started rebuilding my life. After 2 weeks, I felt strong enough to return to my own apartment. Mrs. Peterson welcomed me home with another container of her famous soup. "Your little cat missed you terribly," she said with a chuckle. "He's decided my apartment is his second home now. I think he's adopted me." Her casual use of the word family made me smile. Maybe family wasn't about blood, but about who shows up. I made some immediate changes. I bought high-end air purifiers for every room. I updated all my emergency contacts, replacing my parents with Sarah and, after getting her permission, Mrs. Peterson. I even amended my advance medical directive to explicitly state that my parents were not to be consulted on any medical decisions if I were incapacitated. It was a small, legalistic act, but it felt like a monumental declaration of self-preservation. About a month after my discharge, I felt ready to go back to work. My colleagues welcomed me with a warmth that felt genuine, and my boss, Brian, was incredibly supportive. "Take it easy," he said. "Your health comes first. The work can wait." His simple consideration stood in such stark contrast to my family's behavior, reinforcing my new understanding of what healthy relationships should look like. All this time, I maintained my silence. Olivia sent one text, a breezy, "Hey, how you feeling?" as if I'd had a common cold. I replied with a simple, "Recovering, thanks," and left it at that. My parents finally called, 4 days after they'd read the letter. I let it go to voicemail. My mother's message was strained and defensive. "Chloe, it's your mother. We received your letter. I think you're being extremely dramatic about this whole situation. Your father and I have always done our best for both you and Olivia. Call us when you're ready to be more rational." Her complete dismissal of my pain only confirmed I'd made the right decision. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, no empathy. Just blame. As the 4th week of my recovery began, I got a surprising call from Olivia. "Mom and Dad are acting so weird," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "They won't tell me what you wrote in your letter, but they're fighting all the time and Mom keeps bursting into tears. What did you say to them?" "I told them the truth," I replied simply, "about how they've treated me my entire life, about how they chose to go to a dog park instead of the hospital when doctors thought I was dying." There was a long, heavy silence on her end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I didn't know it was that serious. They just said you were having an allergic reaction and that you'd be fine. Would you have done anything differently if you had known?" I asked, genuinely curious. Another pause. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I've never really had to think about it. Everything has always just been about me." Her honesty was a shock. "That's not your fault," I found myself saying. "That's how they raised us. But I can't be part of it anymore, Liv. It almost killed me. Literally." "Are you saying you don't want to be my sister anymore?" I could hear the little girl in her voice, the one I used to protect. "No," I said softly. "I'm saying I have to figure out how to be my own person first. I've spent my entire life trying to be perfect to earn a love that you got for free. It left me completely hollow. I need to find out who I am when I'm not begging for their approval. I never knew you felt that way, she whispered. You always seemed so strong, so put together. That was the mask I had to wear, I told her. Underneath, I was drowning. Our conversation ended soon after, but it felt like a tiny crack had formed in the thick wall between us. I didn't know if she would truly reflect on it or just fall back into old patterns. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to worry about it. Her reaction was her responsibility, not mine. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and really looked at myself. The physical toll was still visible in my pale skin and the dark circles under my eyes. But there was something new in my gaze, a quiet steadiness that wasn't there before. The desperate, needy girl was fading, replaced by someone quieter, but infinitely more powerful. The road ahead was long, but I was finally on the right path. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was just Chloe, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The day my parents walked into that hospital room and found nothing but an empty bed and a letter was a turning point I wasn't there to see. My knowledge of it comes from Ellie, the kind nurse who had become an unlikely confidant. She called me the day after I was discharged, having gotten my number with my permission. "I hope you don't mind me calling," she started. "I just thought you might want to know what happened." I held my breath, both wanting and dreading the answer. "Please tell me." "They arrived right at 3, Ellie recounted. "I directed them to your room and explained you'd been discharged. Your father seemed irritated, asking why nobody had called them. Your mother, though, she just walked straight to the bed and saw the envelope with your name on it." According to Ellie, my mother picked up the letter and her face went pale. She called my father over and they stood together at the foot of the empty bed, reading it. "I gave them their privacy," Ellie continued, "but I could see them through the small window in the door. I have never seen people's faces change so fast. Your father's went from red to almost purple with anger. Your mother, all the color just drained from her face. About halfway through, she just sat down hard on the edge of the bed, like her legs gave out. When they finished, my father crumpled the letter into a ball, then immediately smoothed it out again, as if he instantly regretted the impulse. My mother just sat there, staring into space." "They stayed in that room for nearly an hour," Ellie said, barely talking. "When they finally left, your mother was openly weeping, and your father looked like he'd aged 20 years. I listened to her account with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were describing characters in a movie. My words had clearly hit their mark. Perhaps, for the first time ever, they were forced to see the family not as they imagined it, but as I had experienced it." "Thank you for telling me, Ellie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And thank you for everything." "You're welcome," she replied warmly. "Take care of yourself, Chloe. You deserve it." Those last 3 words, "you deserve it," echoed in my mind for days. Did I? The rational part of me knew the answer was yes, but a lifetime of being treated as secondary had carved deep grooves of self-doubt into my soul. In the days that followed, I braced for the inevitable confrontation, but it never came. Instead, the silence from my parents was deafening, broken only by that single dismissive voicemail from my mother, and 2 days later, a long email from my father. "Chloe, your letter has forced your mother and me to look at some uncomfortable truths. While I don't agree with all of your accusations, I can admit that we haven't always been as present for you as we should have been. The night the hospital called, we honestly didn't grasp the severity. We've grown so accustomed to you being the strong, independent one that we assume this was something you would handle, like you always do. That was a mistake, and for that, I am sorry. However, you are being unfair in your characterization of our entire family history. We've always been incredibly proud of your accomplishments. Perhaps we didn't show it in the way you needed, but that doesn't mean the pride wasn't there. I hope you will reconsider cutting us off completely. Olivia misses you, and despite what you might think, so do we, Dad." It was a classic non-apology apology, acknowledgement of the one specific incident, but a complete denial of the larger pattern. The line about being proud without acknowledging they never once showed up was particularly telling. I forwarded the email to Dr. Miller and we dissected it in my next session. He's acknowledging the what but not the why, she observed. He's sorry for the misunderstanding, but not for the decades of behavior that created the misunderstanding in the first place. After much thought, I sent a brief, neutral reply. Dad, thank you for saying you're sorry you didn't come to the hospital. That means something. However, this isn't about one night. It's about a lifelong pattern that almost cost me my life. I still need time and space to heal. I hope you can respect that. Chloe. I received no reply. As weeks turned into a month, the silence from my parents continued, but my connection with Olivia began to change. Her texts became more frequent, more thoughtful. One evening, she called me. Was it really that bad for you growing up? She asked, her voice tentative. I always just thought you had it all figured out. You were so smart. Everyone was always saying how impressive you were. That was the outside, Liv, I explained. Inside, I was running a marathon every single day, trying to be perfect enough to get the same attention Mom and Dad gave you for just breathing. Do you remember my high school graduation? I was valedictorian, and they left right after I gave my speech because you said you had a headache. I remember that, she said slowly. I didn't even have a fever. Mom just said I looked pale. And my college graduation? I continued, the memories still sharp. They missed it entirely because you had a big date that night and needed help picking out an outfit. I'd forgotten about that, she whispered. Wow, when you lay it all out like that, it sounds really awful. These conversations were difficult. On one hand, she was a product of the same broken system I was. On the other, she had benefited from it at my direct expense. I tried to be honest about my pain while understanding that her own awakening would be a painful process. 6 weeks after my hospital stay, the confrontation I had been dreading finally happened. My parents showed up at my apartment, unannounced, on a Saturday afternoon. I saw them through the peephole and my first instinct was to hide. But then I took a deep breath, centered myself using a technique, Doctor. Miller had taught me and opened the door. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. Chloe, my mother began, her voice trembling. You look... Well, what are you doing here? I asked, keeping my tone level. We need to talk, my father said, trying to push past me. This has gone on long enough. You can't just cut your family out of your life over one little misunderstanding. That word, misunderstanding, sent a hot flash of anger through me, but I held my ground. This isn't a good time. As I said in my letter, if you want to talk, you need to respect my boundaries and call first. Boundaries? My mother scoffed, as if the word were a foreign insult. We're your parents. We don't need boundaries to see our own daughter. Actually, you do, I said firmly. That's precisely what a boundary is. I asked for space, and showing up at my home unannounced is a violation of that. This is absurd, my father huffed. Olivia told us you've been filling her head with nonsense, trying to turn her against us. I've only told Olivia the truth of my experience, I replied calmly. If that conflicts with the story you've told yourselves, then that is something you need to examine, not me. My mother's face crumpled into tears. How can you be so cruel? Do you have any idea how much you've hurt us? The old, familiar guilt started to creep in, the ingrained habit of taking responsibility for their feelings. I pushed it down. I almost died, Mom. Alone. Because you chose a dog over me. My feelings about that are valid. Your feelings about me having those feelings are your own to manage. They tried every tactic in their old playbook: guilt, obligation, dismissal, appeals to family loyalty. But something in me had fundamentally shifted. The desperate need for their approval had been burned away in that ICU. After 15 minutes of going in circles, I held up a hand. I'm going to close the door now. Please do not come back here unannounced again. If you want to talk, you can call or email, and you will respect my answer if I say I'm not ready. This isn't over, my father said, his face dark with anger. You're right, I agreed, a surprising strength in my voice. This is just the beginning of me finally valuing myself. Goodbye. I closed the door, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. It was terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, I got a text from Olivia. Mom and Dad just got home. They're really upset. Dad keeps saying you've changed. Mom is just crying in her room. What happened? I typed back a simple reply. I stood up for myself. It's new for all of us. A long time passed before she responded. I think I need to learn how to do that too. Those words, so unexpected, gave me the first flicker of real hope. Not for a fairy tale reconciliation, but for something better. A chance for me and my sister to build something real, and a chance for me to finally build a life of my own. The letter hadn't just changed their lives, it had given me permission to change mine. 6 months have passed since I left that letter on my empty hospital bed. 6 months of healing, growth, and seismic shifts, both within me and around me. I'm writing this from my new apartment in a different city, 40 miles and a world away from the house I grew up in. The physical scars of my ordeal have faded. My new medical regimen has kept my autoimmune condition quiet and stable. The move was a necessary step, a fresh start in a place where the ghosts of old dynamics didn't haunt every street corner. My company was incredibly supportive, allowing me to transfer to a new branch, and my new life is taking shape. What's been most remarkable is discovering the chosen family that was waiting for me all along. Freed from the desperate need to please, I've been able to form authentic connections based on mutual respect. My relationship with my biological family has settled into a new, strange normal. My parents and I have minimal contact. They call about once a month, and I answer when I feel emotionally prepared. The conversations are brief, superficial, and they no longer leave me feeling empty and inadequate. I've accepted that they may never be the parents I craved, and that acceptance has liberated me from the constant cycle of hope and disappointment. Olivia, however, has been the biggest surprise. 2 months after my hospital stay, she moved into her own place. She even rehomed Casper with a family friend who had a big yard. I realized I never really wanted a dog, she confessed to me over coffee one day. I just wanted Mom and Dad's attention, and getting whatever I wanted was how I got it. It wasn't fair to the dog, and it really wasn't fair to you. The self-awareness was staggering. When I asked what had changed, her answer was profound. Your letter, she said. Not the one to them, but what you told me, about having to be perfect to earn their love. It made me realize I was doing the same thing, just from the other side. I was being the needy, dependent one because that's what got me their attention. But it was turning me into a person I didn't even like. Olivia and I now meet regularly. Our relationship is still a work in progress, but for the first time, there's an honesty between us. We're learning how to be sisters without the distorting lens of our parents' favoritism. Therapy with Dr. Miller continues to be my anchor. She's helped me see that healing isn't linear. There are days when the old scapegoat thinking tries to resurface, when I catch myself overachieving to prove my worth or shrinking my needs to avoid being difficult. But now I recognize these thoughts for what they are, echoes from a past I've chosen to leave behind. I've learned that true family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by who shows up. The nurse who held my hand, Sarah who drove me to the hospital, Mrs. Peterson who brought me soup. They showed me what family loyalty truly looks like. It's not about grand gestures, it's about the consistent, quiet choice to care. I have forgiven my parents, not for them, but for me. I understand their behavior likely comes from their own unhealed wounds, but forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. It doesn't obligate me to return to a dynamic that almost destroyed me. The most profound lesson, though, has been about my own worth. For 27 years, I believed my value was something I had to earn. I now understand it was my birthright all along. The letter I wrote wasn't just a goodbye to a toxic dynamic, it was a hello to a new life. A life as a woman who knows her worth, sets her boundaries, and chooses relationships that reflect her value, not diminish it. If you're watching this, and my story sounds familiar, if you are the one who has spent your life trying to earn a love that should have been a given, please hear me. You deserve better. Your worth is inherent. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to get water from a dry well and instead turn your energy toward building a life that truly nourishes you. If my story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Hit that like button if you found yourself nodding along, and subscribe for more stories of healing and transformation. I would love to read your own stories in the comments about how you've learned to honor your own worth in the face of difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, the family that truly matters isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you build through love, respect, and the simple, powerful act of showing up.